Morning and a warm welcome to the Simply Divine programme. I'm Maria Colfer. Well, regardless of one's faith or one's nationality, people have long been exercised over human rights. And on the 25th of May, the people of Ireland will be asked to vote on whether or not to repeal the 8th Amendment. With me in the studio this morning is a doctor who also has qualifications in family planning, child health, obstetrics and women's health. She's a member of the Irish College of General Practitioners and a Fellow of the Faculty of Occupational Medicine. In 2005, Deirdre founded the Medwise Occupational Health Services to provide occupational health medical services to employers. She works full-time as the Medical Director of Medwise and its Chief Specialist Occupational Health Physician. In 2011, she founded the Calcutta Project to help treat children abroad. She has Wexford connections and is a member of Doctors for Life. She's Dr. Deirdre Gleeson. Good morning, Dr. Deirdre, and thank you for coming in this morning.
Good morning, Maria, and thank you for that lovely introduction.
And maybe I could ask you first about what are your Wexford connections?
Well, my mother is from Wexford. She's from White Rock Hill, and my father is originally from Limerick, but he was working here in Johnstown Castle back in the 1960s, and they met in a dance hall in Wexford. Yeah. So then we moved to Dublin, so I grew up in Dublin.
Okay. Well, now, can you tell us a little bit about the Calcutta Project, Deirdre?
Well, the Medwise Calcutta Project, it's called. I first went to Calcutta in 2009 with Father Brian Kavanagh of the Almas charity. And I was just really out there. It was I just wanted to experience it and see what it was like and to do some voluntary work. So I worked as a GP in the clinic in Calcutta, and it's attached to a convent, the Sisters of the Holy Cross of Chavano. So while I was there, I got an idea that I would set up my own charity to sponsor a class of children. So the sisters run a home for street children, and every year they take in young girls from the streets, and the girls stay there. It's a very simple house. They stay there, they get shelter, security, and they get a chance of an education. The education is everything for the girls. If they can learn to read and write, they can get themselves out of the poverty trap because they can get a better job and they can move on with their lives. So what we do is we sponsor a class of 10 children. It's not expensive. The nuns are very thrifty. They make every rupee go its full mile, and so it costs maybe about €400 per child per year. So we raise that through sponsorship. We have sponsored walks, jumble sales, and I'm always badgering my own family, of course, for donations. And then once a year I go out to Calcutta, and the nuns have a volunteer flat out there, so people can go. Now, if you go, you pay your own way, obviously, and all your own expenses. And you can either volunteer in the children's home, or I volunteer in the local clinic as a GP.
And what age are those girls now?
They are all between the ages of about 6 and 16. And the last time I went, I brought my own 2 girls with me. They were teenagers at the time. They were about, I'd say, 17 and 15 at the time when they came with me. So they really enjoyed the trip.
Well, now, what I really invited you in to talk about was the 8th Amendment. Dr. Deirdre, can you tell us in simple terms, what is this 8th Amendment?
So the 8th Amendment is Article 43.3 of the Irish Constitution, inserted into the Constitution following a referendum in 1983. And I mean, as we all know, it states that the Irish state acknowledges the right to life of the unborn with due regard to the equal right to the life of the mother, and guarantees in its laws to respect and, as far as practicable by its laws, to defend and vindicate that right. So what it means is that Irish doctors will do their best to save both lives, that the unborn baby in Ireland has the right to be born alive. No matter what situation or circumstances, the baby has the right to be born alive. Now, the phrase with due regard to the equal right to the life of the mother, that's very important for us doctors. And what that means is that doctors will do their best to save both lives, starting with the mother's life. So it means that doctors, obstetricians can do whatever they need to do to save the mother's life. And sometimes by intervening in medical care, it may inadvertently have an adverse effect on the baby, but that wasn't our intention. For example, in preeclampsia, we may have to deliver the baby early. And that puts the baby at risk of the effects of prematurity, but it has to be done to save the mother's life. That's different to a termination, or abortion, which is where the baby is deliberately targeted and killed before delivery.
Well, we're constantly being reminded by some medics that Ireland is the safest country in the world to have a baby. What is the medical care that is being provided at this point in time in our maternity hospitals?
So the Eighth Amendment does not prevent a woman receiving life-saving medical care. And a woman can be sick because of a complication of pregnancy, or there can be a new diagnosis, such as a tumour can be diagnosed during pregnancy, or there could be a pre-existing condition that deteriorates for some reason during pregnancy. So Irish doctors know that they can intervene to do whatever is necessary to save the life of the mother and also to provide her with basic medical care. So, for example, a woman can receive chemotherapy in pregnancy. Now, in these high-risk situations, a team of obstetricians and oncologists will get together. They will have their multidisciplinary meetings and they will decide on the best course of action. But we have to save the mother's life. We start with the mother's life, and they will taper their treatment maybe to try and avoid adverse effect on the baby. But still, the primary aim is to treat the mother and to save her life first of all.
Well, the Halappanavar case, why do some people say that if she had had an abortion that her life would have been saved? And all the evidence points to that. I think it was 7 instances of neglect.
There was actually 13 incidents of missed opportunities that could have saved her life. So we had 3 investigations into the very tragic and sad death of Savita Halappanavar. And there was the coroner's investigation, there was HSE, and there was a HICWA investigation. The HICWA investigation was particularly comprehensive, and the report is 253 pages long, and there were 7 experts in obstetrics, anaesthetics, microbiology, and a patient advocate involved in that research. And they went through her care with a fine-tooth comb. And if you read the executive summary or the press release that was published the day they published the report, I mean, it makes for very sad and very difficult reading. But Savita, there was multiple failures in the provision of the most basic elements of patient care. She died of medical mismanagement of sepsis. And the other point is that what caused her sepsis was a rare and virulent bacteria, E. coli extended spectrum beta-lactamase, which is a bit like the MRSA, so it was a superbug. So the doctors failed to recognise how sick she was. They failed to intervene. There was poor communication within the staff. But most of all, there was just a basic lack of patient care. Her pulse wasn't checked, her blood pressure wasn't checked, her temperature wasn't checked. And the hospital even broke their own protocols. The HICWA were very critical of Galway University Hospital, but also of other maternity hospitals in Ireland, because in 2007 Tanya McCabe died in very similar circumstances, what HICWA described as disturbingly similar circumstances. And the HSE produced guidelines on the management of obstetric sepsis after the death of Tanya McCabe and her son Zach, but they were only implemented in 5 of the 19 maternity hospitals. So they weren't following best practice, and they weren't following basic patient care. So she was getting sicker and sicker in front of them, and they failed to recognise that. What should have happened, and I have a friend who is an obstetrician, and she's also a medical missionary of Mary, and she spent her life out in Nigeria, in rural Nigeria, and she told me that if a case like Savita came into the rural clinic in Nigeria, 17 weeks pregnant with bulging membranes and signs of infection, the first thing they would have done would have been put her on an oxytocin drip to deliver the baby, because otherwise you will have a dead baby and a dead mother. So Savita, they should have intervened to deliver the baby despite the heartbeat. Now they did in the end decide to do that, but in fact as they were preparing to do it, Savita had a stillbirth of a baby girl. So they did realise how sick she was, but by the time they realised it, it was too late. And she died then of septic shock.
Dear, oh dear. Well, only last week we had all the gory details of a very high-profile alleged rape case coming from Northern Ireland, and a very high-profile reaction when the jury returned a verdict of not guilty. But Dr. Deirdre, if a girl has the misfortune and horror of being raped, what options are open to her in this country at the present time?
Well, the answer to that is proper sexual assault treatment services. And there are at present in the country 5 sexual assault treatment units. I believe your nearest one is Waterford and Dublin. And we have experts, doctors, trained doctors and nurses available to provide care and counselling to a woman in such a situation. And the most important thing is that they will take proper forensic samples to apprehend the perpetrator. So the man who has committed this crime will be prosecuted, and the doctors and the nurses will gather the forensic evidence to prove that the woman was indeed raped. And the man will be given the benefit of natural justice. He will be given the opportunity to go to court and defend himself, as happened in Belfast. And of course, as we know, these cases can be very difficult to prove. But if the mother becomes pregnant as a result of rape, the baby is an innocent third party who has not committed a crime and certainly does not deserve to be put to death. And in fact, all the studies would show that in the situation of a crisis pregnancy, where a woman is pregnant and doesn't want to be pregnant, or pregnancy is arising in difficult social circumstances, that it is better for her mental health to continue with the pregnancy. Giving her an abortion is simply adding to the trauma and the violence and increasing her risk of mental health issues. And we know this because I don't know if you've heard of Pam Stenzel. She is an American speaker. She was conceived through rape herself. She's a wonderful pro-life speaker. You can go on her website and listen to her talks. And she says that she thanks her birth mother, who was only a teenager at the time, for giving her life and also for giving her family, because she was adopted to a very loving family and had a very happy childhood. Eartha Kitt, of course, was conceived through rape. The child adopted by Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt, Sahara, she was conceived through rape. So the point is that the baby is an innocent third party. But the other important point is that it is better for the mother's mental health to continue with the pregnancy, and then she can decide whether to keep her baby or not. And then we need rapid access to sexual assault treatment services, which will ensure that proper forensic samples are taken to apprehend the perpetrator and that the mother is given all medical care to prevent infection.
Well, some parents suffer the dreadful trauma of being told their unborn child has medical problems, or perhaps a life-limiting condition or fatal fetal abnormality, as we hear about. And some have argued to recommend an abortion as a solution in this instance. What is the official line on this from the medical viewpoint?
Well, we in Doctors for Life, we believe that medicine is a service to human life at all stages, from conception to natural death. So we are opposed to abortion and we are opposed to euthanasia. Babies with life-limiting conditions deserve the chance to be born alive, and they deserve the opportunity to access medical care. There are always babies who confound medical expectations, who we think haven't a hope of surviving, and in actual fact they do survive, and some have done very well. And if you go onto the website One Day More, you can hear stories, such stories of families who withstood the pressure to abort their baby and were very grateful for it. Then there's always the problem of false negatives and false positives. No test is 100% accurate. And the screen for Down syndrome is not accurate. Now it's better than it used to be, and it is improving. And it's interesting because it used to be that we couldn't diagnose Down syndrome until the baby was born. Then we could diagnose it in the 3rd trimester. Now we can diagnose it in the 2nd trimester. So it doesn't take a leap of logic to understand that it won't be long until we can diagnose it in the 1st trimester, which will be under the 12 weeks that the government are proposing to allow abortion without on any grounds. So what has happened is that once we allow for abortion on the basis of disability or life-limiting conditions, it's an equality issue. People with disabilities, children with disabilities, their lives are not considered to be the same value as other children, and they can be targeted for abortion. And families will say that they feel under pressure to abort their child. I had a lady she was an Eastern European lady, and she was told her child had Down syndrome. And I mean, it was incredible, the pressure that she was put under. She was made to feel guilty for continuing with the pregnancy, that this baby would be a burden. And she went to her own country and had the abortion, and she told me that she was convinced the baby did not have Down syndrome. But it was too late by then. And women are deeply hurt by abortion. And it's very difficult as a doctor to comfort somebody in that situation. You know, she's grieving for the loss of her child. She's traumatized by the whole abortion experience, and you know, how do we help her in that situation? There are, of course, groups that do help women, Rachel's Vineyard and Women Hurt. But what about the babies who don't survive? Those who have, for example, anencephaly, where there is no hope of surviving maybe a few minutes after birth. So the answer to that is the same as any other patient with life-limiting conditions. We provide palliative care, what we call perinatal hospice care or perinatal palliative care, which is according to the principles of palliative medicine. So we accept death and we allow nature take its course. We neither hasten death nor hinder death. And the focus is on compassion, on pain relief, and on getting the family to celebrate the child's life, however small amount of time that might be. And the families will all say afterwards that holding the baby, even though it may have only been for a few minutes, that gave them great comfort later on in their journey of grief as they came to terms with the loss of their child. And that certainly is a much more humane way of dealing with these situations than termination of pregnancy.
Does an abortion procedure ever fail?
Yes, in the UK in 2007, which is the last statistics we have for this, a confidential inquiry into the maternal and child health perinatal mortality report found that 66 babies in the UK survived abortion in that year. And they were simply left to die, and one of them lasted for 10 hours. So it can be quite grisly. Late-term abortions are particularly difficult, and if you read the Royal College of Obstetricians guidelines, they say feticide is the term they use to kill the baby, and make sure feticide is complete before delivery. Otherwise, the abortion may give rise to a live birth, which is not the intention of the abortion. That's a direct quote. So it does happen. We have people, for example, Gianna Jessen, who is coming to Ireland on the 5th of May to speak. She is a survivor of a late-term abortion. Babies can, abortion is an unnatural process. We're interfering with nature. It's very difficult to it's not a simple procedure as people would have us believe. It's actually quite a complicated procedure. So you either have to kill the baby before birth, or you have to, in the early stages, they will, like the abortion pill, will poison the baby. And in the later stages, you have to inject something into the baby's heart to kill the baby, so the baby will be stillborn. So that's difficult to do. Sally Phillips, who is the mother of a child with Down syndrome, she has produced a documentary, A World Without Down Syndrome. It's a BBC documentary. Very useful, very worthwhile listening. She's neither pro-choice nor pro-life, but she interviews various mothers who and says to them, what did you do when you had your diagnosis? Now, Sally Phillips had a false negative test for Down syndrome, and in fact could have sued the hospital for wrongful birth, and wrongful births cost the NHS 10 million every year. So if I'm pregnant and I ask the doctor to test my baby for a condition and the test is wrong, I can sue the doctor. So how about that? But when she interviewed this one mother, and the mother spoke about how she had decided to abort the baby, and she was about 7 or 8 months pregnant, and she could feel the baby moving around inside her, and the doctor gave the baby the injection, and then the baby went quiet, and she knew that the baby was dead then. These experiences are hugely traumatic for the mother, but of course the child loses his or her life in the process as well.
What about a doctor who wants to be a conscientious objector? What happens to him, or a nurse who doesn't want to participate?
So we in Doctors for Life, that is one of our major concerns, is that there will not be sufficient provisions for those of us who object in conscience. And as you know, Wexford, your local hospital, has been designated as a centre that will most likely be performing abortions. So it will affect the local doctors and nurses, but also the porters, the theatre attendants, the ward assistants. We have a conference on the 21st of April in Dublin, and we have one of our speakers is Mary Dugan, who is a midwife from Glasgow, and she refused to supervise abortions, and she lost her case. So in the UK, they used to be quite good with conscientious objection, but that safeguard is no longer present. But there's also if there's practical difficulties, I mean, if suddenly they're doing abortions in Wexford General Hospital, who's going to do it and who's not going to do it? And if you do an interview for a job, will you be asked at the interview, are you prepared to participate in abortions or are you not prepared to participate in abortions? So we're concerned that the conscientious objection will not be strong enough, and that there'll be despite there being a conscientious objection provision, that there'll be practical difficulties that will not be able to overcome. And of course, in the Protection of Life in Pregnancy Act, the only people who are afforded the benefit of conscientious objection are the doctors and nurses. Other people, like pharmacists, for example, the local pharmacists will be asked to issue the abortion pill, and nobody has asked them what is their views on. Many of them would be very pro-life and don't want to be involved in that process. So the conscientious objection is a huge concern for us, and it is something that we will not be silent on.
And there is no protection as such, is there, for somebody who is a conscientious?
The Medical Council does give us protection. We are, in theory, allowed to object, for example, to prescribing the morning after pill or contraception or some other form of treatment that the doctor has an honestly held objection to. But what we have to do is refer the patient to another doctor. So if a woman comes to me and says, I want an abortion, Dr. Gleeson, and I say, I'm afraid I can't help you with that, I'm obliged to refer her to another doctor who will help her with that. But I won't be doing that, so I will be breaking the law, but that'll be interesting. But there are many of us in that situation that we don't feel the provisions are strong enough. This is a life and death situation, and we're not prepared to refer the patient on to another doctor.
How would you know if your doctor is a doctor for life?
We are a network. There's about 160 people on our email list at the moment. Most doctors are pro-life, and in fact, a recent study by the ICGP found that 70% of GPs said they wouldn't be prescribing the abortion pill. So I think you can assume that most doctors are. You can ask your doctor straight out if they're pro-life or not. For data protection, we can't give out people's names, but many doctors are quite public about their pro-life views, and as I said, we have a conference coming up, and we have the Medical Alliance now, which are very good, so doctors can sign up in support of retaining the 8th Amendment.
Finally, Dr. Deirdre, what would be the consequences of repealing the 8th in this referendum?
Well, there will be no longer any legal protection for the unborn in this country, and we will be handing over the power to legislate for abortion to politicians. So we are basically handing the whole decision over to politicians, and not just the current politicians, but future politicians. Mothers will feel in difficult situations, will feel pressured into abortion because legislation influences our culture. If the grounds for abortion will widen, abortion will become normalised, and the rates will inevitably increase. In the UK, they introduced abortion on restricted grounds in 1967, and now they have 200,000 abortions per annum, 98% of which are for social reasons. The rates of abortion in the UK are 17.5 per thousand women. In Ireland, it's 4.4 per thousand women. So our rates are likely to increase. Irish women have low abortion rates. If we lose the 8th Amendment, it will inevitably lead to abortion on demand, and the rates of abortion will increase.
Dr. Deirdre, thank you for coming in and for your time and clarity on this very sensitive and right to life issue. And it matters little if we are believers or non-believers. The protection of the right to a life is a fundamental